My name is Nina Carter, and for most of my life I wore responsibility like a badge. Not because I loved it, not because I was naturally suited for it, but because someone had to. And in our house, that someone was always me. I grew up in a modest home in West Philadelphia, the older of two daughters. My parents Raymond and Linda were traditional to their core hard-working church-going, the kind of people who believed family roles were assigned at birth and should never be questioned. From a young age, it was clear that Elise, my little sister, was the delicate one, the one to protect, to comfort, to excuse. Me, I was the one who made sure dinner didn't burn when Mum worked late. I was the one who helped Dad sort out the mail and taxes when he got overwhelmed. I was the one who cancelled play dates because Elise had a cold and someone had to stay home. That someone was never her. At 10, I was ironing uniforms. At 12, I was cooking meals for 4. At 15, I was tutoring Elise so she wouldn't fail geometry. My mother used to smile and say, "Nina just gets it. She's our little adult." It sounded like praise. It wasn't. By the time I left for college, I thought I had finally outgrown that version of myself. I moved to Boston, studied education, and became a middle school teacher. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I built a quiet life, neat and functional, an apartment with houseplants and mismatched mugs, a job that paid the bills, and left me with enough energy to meet friends on weekends. I kept in touch with my family, of course. I visited on holidays, sent birthday gifts, called once a week. But I kept a distance just enough to breathe, just enough to remember I belonged to myself now. Or so I thought. The call came on a cold Tuesday morning in January. I was making lesson plans and drinking my second cup of coffee when my phone lit up Mom. I let it ring twice. We'd argued the week before, something small I don't even remember now, and I wasn't in the mood for another guilt trip, but something told me to pick up. Her voice came rushed tight with urgency, but coated in that passive-aggressive warmth I knew too well. "Nina, sweetheart, I need you to come home this weekend." I blinked. "Is something wrong?" "It's Elise," she said. "She's in a situation." I didn't even need to ask. I already knew. Elise, 29, had been living at home since her second failed attempt at finishing art school. She worked odd jobs, mostly barista shifts she never kept for long, and had a habit of dating men who treated her like decoration. I'd given up trying to help after the last one wrecked her credit and skipped town. "She's pregnant," Mom finally said, "and the guy's out of the picture." There was silence. Then, "We just need you here for a few days, to talk things through, as a family." I should have said no. I should have heard the warning in her voice, the manipulation, wound tight in every syllable. But the part of me that still craved approval, still wanted to be the good daughter, overruled the rest. "Okay," I said, "just the weekend." As I hung up, a part of me stirred uneasily. I looked around at my little apartment, the books I'd arranged by color, the half-done puzzle on my coffee table, the heating pad still warm on the couch. I had built this life brick by careful brick, and something told me I was about to risk all of it. Still, I packed a bag, just enough for 2 nights. I told my co-workers I'd be back Monday. I watered my plants, turned off the lights, locked the door behind me. The road to Philadelphia was familiar muscle memory, really. I hadn't driven it in over a year, but my hand still knew when to switch lanes before the toll booths, when to slow down near the curve past Cherry Hill. The closer I got, the tighter my chest became. When I pulled into the driveway, Mom was already at the door. "There she is," she said, arms outstretched like nothing was wrong. "Our Nina." Dad was behind her, giving me a quick side hug, already talking about dinner. The smell of meatloaf filled the house. It was all too warm, too rehearsed. I hadn't even taken off my coat when Mom said, "Come upstairs. We've made a few changes." I followed, heart pounding. My old room was at the end of the hall. I hadn't seen it since the Christmas before last. When she opened the door, my breath caught. The posters were gone, the bookshelves cleared. In their place, a white crib, a rocking chair, yellow and grey wallpaper with cartoon elephants. "What is this?" the nursery mom said, smiling. "We thought it made sense to use your old room. It gets the most light." I stared at the mobile above the crib. Slowly, deliberately, I asked, "Where am I sleeping?" She didn't blink. The fold-out in the den, of course. I felt it then, the first snap of something cracking inside me. But I stayed quiet. Just for the weekend. Right. The den was still as cramped as I remembered, but colder. Probably because it wasn't meant to be a bedroom. It was a glorified hallway with a pull-out sofa and no door wedged between the kitchen and the laundry nook. Mom had left a folded blanket on the cushion and a half-full lavender diffuser on the side table, as if aromatherapy could disguise the message, "You don't belong here." I stared at the couch for a full minute before sitting down. The air smelled faintly of bleach and cinnamon. Someone had cleaned in a hurry. Later that evening, over meatloaf and 2 sweet iced tea, the trap began to close. At first the conversation was innocuous. Dad asked about my students. Mum mentioned the neighbors. Elise barely spoke. She sat quietly across from me, her belly starting to show beneath a sweatshirt that read, "Don't ask." It was only during dessert, when Mom brought out the pecan pie, that the tone shifted. So Dad said, slicing his slice into perfect triangles, "Your mother and I have been talking about the family, about Elise, the baby." I felt a slow sinking dread. I kept my fork still. Mom chimed in, "We think it makes sense for you to stay, not just the weekend. For a while." I blinked. "What do you mean, stay?" "Well," she said, adjusting her sweater, like the words were no big deal. "You're already working from home, right? Remote teaching's so common these days." "I'm a lead teacher," I said carefully. "I'm not fully remote. I still have in-person classes, meetings. I'm returning Monday." Dad waved that away like it was irrelevant. "You could transfer. There are plenty of schools here. And we need someone stable, especially with Elise's condition." "I'm pregnant," Elise muttered, "not disabled." Mom gave her a look and turned back to me. "You're so good with kids, Nina. You've always had that gift." "That's my job," I said, "not my life." They went quiet for a beat. Then Dad said, "It's just that the baby's going to need a lot of support. And Elise—" "She's not alone," I interrupted. "You're here, and she's the mother." "We're not getting any younger," Mom said softly. And there it was, the guilt. The soft silken thread pulling me back into the role they'd carved out for me since childhood. The responsible one. The helper. The one who never says no. I forced myself to smile to keep the peace. "I'm happy to help this weekend," I said. "But I can't stay. I have commitments." Elise gave an exaggerated sigh. "It's not like you're out there curing cancer." My fingers clenched under the table. That night I lay on the lumpy couch in the den, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun shadows across the walls. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a trapdoor opening beneath me. I woke the next morning to the sound of someone knocking on the wall. "Elise needs crackers," Mom called through the kitchen. "She's nauseous." I checked my phone, 6:18 a.m. By the time I returned with the crackers, Elise had fallen asleep again. I left them on her nightstand and retreated to the bathroom, brushing my teeth with shaking hands. My stomach was in knots, and it wasn't the meatloaf. I called my colleague before breakfast. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just family stuff," I said, "but I'll be back Monday." "Of course, let me know if you need anything." I wanted to believe it would be that simple. Later that day, I wandered into the hallway looking for my phone charger. I opened the wrong door and found myself in Dad's office. A pile of unopened bills sat on the desk's second mortgage papers, late notices, hospital co-pays, red stamps, bold type, urgent. I froze. Was this about money? Back in the kitchen, I asked gently, "Everything okay with your finances?" Dad stiffened. "We're managing." Mom shot him a look. "This isn't about us," she said. "It's about family, about supporting each other, about love." But it wasn't love. It was strategy, positioning. They were counting on me not just emotionally, but financially. And worse, they hadn't even asked. They'd assumed. That evening, I found out just how far that assumption went. Our neighbor, Mrs. Jackson, dropped by with a casserole. "It's so lovely having you back, Nina," she said with a smile. "Your mum says you're moving home for good." I nearly dropped the plate I was drying. "Sorry. She's been telling everyone you'll be here to help Elise raise the baby. Says you're a blessing." The rest of her words blurred. I walked into the living room and sat down hard. They'd been announcing my return for weeks. That night I confronted them. I never agreed to stay. "You didn't have to," Mom said gently. "It's just understood." "No," I said, "it isn't." Elise stood up. So what, you're just going to abandon your own niece? Run back to your little apartment and your little job, like nothing's changed? That's not fair. What's not fair, Dad said, is expecting us to do this alone. You're part of this family. I stood there stunned, feeling like a prisoner whose trial had already been held without her. I went to bed that night without saying goodnight. No one came to check on me. The house was quiet and cold. In that silence, I felt something harden inside me. I had to find a way out, because this wasn't a visit anymore. This was a sentence. The next morning, I didn't even bother pretending to sleep in. I was already awake when the sun rose, lying rigid on the pull-out couch, with my jaw clenched and my mind racing. My body felt like it was carrying bricks, each one labeled with another unspoken expectation. Be helpful, be flexible, be the better daughter. Mum greeted me in the kitchen with her usual cheer. I made pancakes, blueberry, your favorite. I nodded mechanically, pouring coffee. My hands were trembling slightly, and I could feel the smile on my face cracking from the effort. I couldn't tell if I was angrier at them or at myself for not walking out last night. Over breakfast, Dad said, so I called Mr. Abramowitz, remember the principal at Roosevelt. They might have an opening for next fall. You should send in your resume, just in case. I looked up slowly. You called about a job for me? He smiled like he'd done me a favor. It's a great school, 5 minutes from here. You'd be home in time to help with the baby every day. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said evenly, you had no right. We're just thinking ahead, Mom chimed in. Why make things harder than they need to be? Because you're making choices for a life that isn't yours, I wanted to shout. But I didn't. Not yet. That afternoon, while Elise napped, Mom asked me to help repaint the nursery. Just a fresh coat, she said, handing me a brush. We're thinking soft green now, more gender neutral. I hesitated, then relented. What harm could one wall do? But halfway through, Mum said casually, once you're settled back in, we can add a bookshelf. Maybe some of your old teaching books. I set the brush down slowly. I'm not staying. She tilted her head, brush still moving. You're here, aren't you? It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. That night, I called my landlord in Boston just to feel grounded in a reality I still had control over. But when I gave my name, the tone on the other end changed. Oh, he said, I assumed you were staying in Philly. Your mother said you wouldn't be renewing. My heart stopped. She what? She called a few days ago, said there was a family emergency. I haven't taken any steps yet, but I hung up before he could finish. Back in the den, I found my laptop open. I never left it open. My financial records were still on the screen. In the corner of the browser, search results bank account beneficiary rules. I nearly vomited. They weren't just planning my life. They were snooping through it, maybe even preparing to control my assets. I confronted Mom. Her face didn't even flinch. I was looking for stamps. On my laptop. She crossed her arms. You've always been dramatic, Nina. That word. Dramatic. The one they used every time I drew a boundary they didn't like. That night, I slept with my laptop zipped inside my duffel bag and my wallet under my pillow. The next morning, I found a printed sheet in Dad's office labeled Family Care Agreement. Legalese, terms, stipulations, the name Nina Carter already typed in. I sat down in his desk chair, dizzy. I was the designated caregiver. They'd written up a contract. A contract. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. This was real. This was a plan, and I was the cornerstone of it. Later that day, I heard Elise talking to a friend on speakerphone in the living room. Yeah, it's perfect. Mom and Dad are thrilled. Nina's going to be living here full-time. She's basically the baby's nanny. It's like a family village. She giggled. I turned and walked straight out the front door, barefoot into the cold. I stood on the front porch and let the wind slap my face until I could think again. They weren't just assuming I'd stay. They were rewriting my entire future while I was still standing in the middle of it. That evening during dinner, baked ziti heavy with mozzarella, I stayed quiet. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I didn't offer help with the dishes. I didn't smile. But I listened. Mom said we're thinking about having the baby shower here. The house just has better lighting. Elise nodded. And it'll be great to show everyone the nursery, especially since Nina's been helping so much. Dad added, we'll invite the whole family. It'll be a good way to share the news that you're moving back. I set my fork down and stood up. I'm going to bed. They called after me, but I didn't respond. In the dark of the den, I opened my laptop and began searching how to break a lease legally storage units near Boston, how to change your phone number without family knowing. I wasn't sure if I was planning a move or an escape. Maybe both. What I did know was that if I didn't leave soon, I might never leave at all. The next morning began like the others. An early knock, a request whispered through the kitchen door. Elise is having back pain. Can you rub her shoulders? I didn't answer. Instead, I got dressed in silence, packed a few essentials into my tote and headed out the door with my laptop. Going to the library, I told Mom. Better Wi-Fi. She nodded, pleased that I seemed cooperative again. Get yourself a muffin while you're there, sweetie. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, I exhaled like I hadn't breathed in days. At the local cafe, I ordered black coffee and found a corner seat near the window. I opened my laptop, tethered my hotspot, and wrote the email that would become my lifeline. Subject: urgent personal situation. Hi, Melissa, I need to speak to you confidentially. It's about my teaching contract, and I may need a transfer. Can we Zoom this afternoon? Best, Nina. Melissa was my supervisor back in Boston, kind, but no nonsense. If anyone would hear me out, it was her. I hit send and stared at the screen until my reflection blurred behind my inbox. This wasn't just about leaving a house. It was about leaving a system, a web of manipulation that had existed since I was old enough to tie my shoes. The family had never asked me if I wanted to carry responsibility. They'd simply placed it in my hands and dared me to drop it. Back at the house, I tried to act normal. Smiled when Elise asked if I'd brought her a muffin I hadn't. Nodded when Mom mentioned how excited Aunt Teresa was to see me at the baby shower. Later that afternoon, I received Melissa's reply. Zoom link 3:00 p.m. Private, I'm all ears. At 2:55, I slipped into the laundry room, ironically the most private room in the house, and joined the call with headphones on. Melissa's face appeared concerned. You look tired, she said gently. I am, I replied. But it's more than that. Melissa, I think I'm being emotionally coerced by my family, and I need to leave, fast. I told her everything: the manipulated lease, the snooping, the fake announcements. I didn't cry. I didn't embellish. I just laid it all out like evidence at a trial. Her brows furrowed in disbelief. This sounds like hostage behavior. I nodded. It feels like it. I can help, she said. It's not official yet, but we've been exploring a new pilot program in Portland. It's virtual first. I can recommend you as a lead educator. The offer caught me off guard. Portland? A whole coast away. They'd pay for your relocation, she added. I'll push the paperwork through tonight. My breath caught in my throat. I don't want them to know where I go. You don't have to tell anyone, she said. I'll use your personal email only. We'll keep it off district files for now. After the call ended, I sat in the dark laundry room for a long time, listening to the rumble of the dryer and the muffled sounds of Elise laughing at a reality show. I wasn't trapped yet, but I was running out of time. That evening, the family staged another ambush. Just a small gathering, Mom had said earlier. Just cake and tea, neighbors and family. When I stepped into the living room, I froze. 30 people were there. Streamers, pink balloons, gifts, a banner that read, Welcome Baby Carter, and beneath it, in cursive gold letters, Thank you, Aunt Nina. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I smiled for photos. I passed out cake. I wrote down gift tags with trembling hands. The worst moment came when Elise Glowing sat on the couch and someone asked her what her plans were after the birth. Oh, I'll take a few months off, she said breezily. But it's fine. Nina will be here full time. I'll be able to go back to part-time work easily. All eyes turned to me. A pause. I opened my mouth. But Mom jumped in Nina's, made the selfless choice to move home permanently. It's such a blessing. She's giving up her job, someone asked. Her heart's just that big, Mom said. Everyone applauded. I didn't. I just stood there holding an empty plate, drowning in a lie I had never agreed to tell. After the guests left, the gloves came off. You humiliated us, Mom hissed in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes with vengeance. You lied about my life, I snapped back. I haven't quit anything. I haven't agreed to anything. You made it up. We did what's necessary, Dad said from behind her. You were being stubborn. You called my landlord without asking. You printed legal documents with my name. You told strangers I was going to be a nanny. We raised you, Mom snapped. It's your turn to help us now. I'm not Elise's co-parent, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not her backup plan. Mom gasped as if I'd slapped her. You are ungrateful, she said. You are cruel. I am done, I replied. That night, while they watched TV in the living room, I sat in the den with a spiral notebook drawing timelines and checklists. Portland, transfer, temporary housing, storage for my things, a new phone plan, a fraud alert on my credit. I wasn't just leaving. I was disappearing, because if they wouldn't respect my boundaries, I'd have to disappear to enforce them. By sunrise, I was already dressed. I told Mom I was going out to run errands, groceries, printer ink, maybe a library visit. She beamed at me, fooled by the calm tone and tote bag slung over my shoulder. Take your time, she said, sipping coffee in her robe. Your father's working on the baby gate. Elise is still asleep. Perfect. Instead of heading to the store, I drove to the nearest branch of my credit union and opened a brand new account. I transferred most of my savings into it, leaving just enough behind to avoid suspicion. Then, I bought a prepaid phone with cash, paid off my card, and stuffed the receipt deep into my pocket like a secret I couldn't afford to lose. My hands were shaking the whole time. Every movement felt like rebellion. Every swipe of my card felt like liberation. After the bank, I drove to a storage facility I'd scouted the night before. I reserved a small climate-controlled unit under a shortened version of my name. I packed a duffel bag with essentials, documents, charger, laptop, backup keys, and placed it behind a crate labeled holiday decorations. If anyone looked in, it would seem harmless. Forgotten. Back at the house, I feigned casual. I helped Mom prep dinner, laughed when Dad tripped over a dog toy, and nodded politely when Elise asked for help putting together her baby registry. Every gesture was performance art, but I wasn't staying, not 1 minute longer than I had to. The next morning, a neighbor dropped off a folder of documents. Raymond asked me to print these out from his office, she said cheerfully. Something about formalizing childcare. I blinked. Excuse me. She waved a hand. Oh, it's nothing serious. Just a family contract. Your dad said it's good to have everything in writing now that you're living here full-time. That evening after dinner, I waited until the dishwasher hummed in the background before confronting them. You made a legal contract with my name. It's just a draft, Dad said, defensive. We were trying to get things organized. For my signature, I asked, my voice low. Without my consent. Mom looked genuinely surprised that I was upset. I don't understand why you're making this difficult, she said. We're all just trying to do what's best. For who? The silence was answer enough. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the pull-out couch, arms crossed over my chest, mind circling like a caged animal. Every second I stayed here, I was affirming the lie they told themselves, that I would fold, that I would give in, that I would become what they wanted simply because they needed it. But I wasn't theirs. Not anymore. The next day the cracks deepened. I overheard Elise talking to Dad in the living room while I folded laundry in the hallway. I just want to be sure Nina won't change her mind, she whispered. She won't, Dad said confidently. She never has. That's what makes her so reliable. Reliable. Predictable. Exploitable. That night, I pulled out my notebook and finalized my exit plan. Transfer work confirmed. Temporary housing in Portland secured through Melissa. Storage in Boston arranged. New phone activated. Emergency contact Rachel, my best friend since college, living in Oregon. I wrote a short letter to Elise and sealed it in an envelope. Not for now, but for after. When the dust settled, if it ever did. On my last night in the house, I offered to do a movie night. Something silly, nostalgic. They were delighted, taking it as a sign I was softening. I popped popcorn, poured sparkling water into wine glasses, played hostess one last time. Mom fell asleep halfway through. Dad snored quietly in the recliner. Elise sat scrolling on her phone, humming softly. I memorized their faces, not out of love, out of necessity. The next morning, I rose before dawn, fully dressed, bag in hand. I told Mom I was going to the bakery for her favorite cinnamon rolls. She asked for decaf coffee too. I kissed her on the cheek. My heart pounded in my throat. Then I walked out the door and didn't look back. The car ride was silent. No radio, no music. Just the sound of tires spinning toward freedom. Half an hour later, I stopped at a rest area and switched phones. I removed the SIM card from the family tracked line and snapped it in half, inserted the new one, texted Rachel en route. ETA, 6 hours. The road ahead stretched wide and open, and behind me the trap collapsed into nothing more than a memory I refused to carry forward. Rachel greeted me with a hug that nearly broke me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to smile through gritted teeth. I didn't have to pretend that I wasn't falling apart. I made the guest room cozy, she said gently. It's yours for as long as you need. Her apartment in Eugene, Oregon smelled like fresh linen and tea. It wasn't just the scent, it was the atmosphere. Everything here felt quiet and warm, and most importantly, safe. I dropped my bag and collapsed onto the bed, exhaling so hard it came out like a sob. I didn't even realize how much I was holding in, I whispered into the pillow. Rachel sat beside me, her hand on my back. You're safe now. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. That night, I slept for 12 hours straight. The next morning, I woke up to 24 missed calls. Mom, Dad, Elise. Voicemails ranged from anxious to angry to downright manipulative. We're worried sick. How could you just disappear? Elise is having cramps. She needs you. This isn't like you, Nina. Come home, we'll talk like adults. But I was done talking in circles. I called Melissa and finalized the Portland transfer. She confirmed that the district had signed off and that my new housing allowance was already deposited. I'd start orientation the following Monday. It's a fresh start, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. No one here knows your history. You get to define your future. I cried again after we hung up, not out of sadness, but release. My identity wasn't tied to being someone's daughter or sister or live-in caregiver. It could be something entirely new. Still, grief has a strange way of sneaking in through the side door, even when you've barricaded the front. I grieved the version of my family I had clung to for so long, the illusion that, if I just worked harder, sacrificed more, they'd finally see me, appreciate me, love me for who I was, rather than what I gave. Instead, they saw me as utility, not daughter, not sister, just resource. I spent that weekend boxing up the last remnants of my Boston apartment. The moving company I'd hired packed everything and shipped it to a Portland storage unit. I asked them to label the boxes M. Carter instead of Nina, just in case my parents tried to track them. I didn't put it past them anymore. Rachel drove me down to Portland that Sunday. The drive was quiet and scenic, filled with nervous glances and bursts of conversation. She didn't press for more than I was ready to give, and I loved her for that. When we pulled up to my temporary apartment, a clean, minimalist space with huge windows and soft gray walls, I felt something shift in my chest. I wasn't just away, I was gone. I texted Melissa to let her know I'd arrived safely. Then I turned off my phone for the night. No more voicemails, no more guilt. The following week, I began to build a new rhythm. Morning walks through Forest Park, late-night ramen at the corner place. I reconnected with old college acquaintances, even joined a ceramics class on a whim. My muscles remembered what it felt like to breathe without shrinking, but the calls didn't stop. One by one, my family tried to track me down. They emailed me from every address they had. They reached out to former co-workers on LinkedIn. They called Rachel's landline at work. Eventually, my old landlord forwarded a letter from my father, a printed copy of a family reconciliation request, complete with signatures, complete with a threat. If you don't come home willingly, we'll be forced to report you as a missing person and claim diminished capacity. That wasn't just overreach, that was psychological warfare. I sent it to my new therapist, Dr. Marion, assigned through my district's employee wellness program. She read it silently, then looked up and said, "You are not crazy. This is coercion." I know I said. "But do you believe it?" she asked. I paused. "Yes," I said at last. "For the first time in my life, I really do." That night, I contacted a family law attorney. I asked her to draft a cease and desist letter citing harassment, false medical claims, and unauthorized interference with my housing and employment. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. And when the letter was delivered to my parents' address, the calls finally stopped. Mostly. There was still the occasional email, short, passive-aggressive, laced with self-pity. But the worst of the storm had passed. In its place, silence. And within that silence, peace. A month into my new life, I received one final update this time from an old neighbor back in Philadelphia. A baby had been born. Elise named her Nina. It should have felt sweet. It didn't. It felt like another leash, a symbol of everything they expected from me, everything they still refused to release. But I wasn't that name anymore. I was rebuilding, and this time, the foundation was mine. Freedom feels like a strange combination of euphoria and grief. You don't just leave a toxic family dynamic and wake up whole again. You wake up haunted. Even the silence can feel dangerous, as though at any moment it will be broken by another guilt-drenched phone call or a knock at the door bearing consequences. But in that liminal space between escape and healing, I began to build. My therapist, Dr. Marion, helped me anchor my thoughts. Write everything down, she said. Every manipulation, every moment you second-guessed yourself. Then read it aloud, not to make it disappear, but to make it real. So I did. I wrote about the first time Elise blamed me for her broken bracelet when we were children, and how my mother immediately believed her. I wrote about the time Dad scolded me for not giving up my spring break to watch Elise after her minor surgery, even though I'd already worked overtime all month. I wrote about the family dinners where I served cleaned poured drinks and was still accused of being cold if I didn't laugh loud enough at Elise's stories. And I wrote about the baby, how a child I didn't bring into this world was being used as leverage to erase everything I'd built for myself. Putting it on paper didn't erase the sting, but it did take away their monopoly on the narrative. I got to tell the story now. Meanwhile, the school district in Portland welcomed me like I was a long-lost puzzle piece. My colleagues were kind, curious, unintrusive. I shared only what I felt comfortable with. I relocated from Boston, I'd say. No one needed to know I'd also relocated from being someone else's emotional workhorse. That spring, I found a permanent apartment, small, sunlit, tucked on a quiet street, with a little balcony I filled with herbs. Basil, rosemary, mint. I liked the way they reminded me of nourishment. My neighbors were retired artists, a couple who painted abstract portraits in their garage and played jazz in the evenings. I told them I was a teacher. They smiled and said, "We can tell." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in months. But the past has a way of pulling at your hem just when you're learning how to dance. 6 weeks after I'd settled into the new place, the police knocked on my door. A wellness check. "Your family filed a missing person report," the officer said, his voice careful. "Said you might be in mental distress." I showed him my ID, my signed lease, my work badge, my fully stocked fridge. "I left voluntarily," I said, hands shaking only slightly. "And I'm fine." He took notes, nodded. "We have to follow up, but we'll log this as resolved." As he stepped outside, he paused. "You're not the first person I've seen in this situation." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. The next day, my lawyer sent another letter to my parents. This one more direct. It included the threat of restraining orders and a compilation of all the ways they had violated my legal and personal boundaries. It worked. There were no more visits, no more letters. Instead, silence fell again, this time edged with recognition. They couldn't control me anymore, and they knew it. The weeks that followed were the first time I'd ever experienced peace as a choice rather than an accident. I bought a bicycle. I joined a local book club. I went to a cooking class and burned a soufflé so badly that the instructor couldn't stop laughing. I made friends, not just acquaintances, but real friends. People who knew me as Nina the teacher, not Nina the caretaker. One evening, sitting on the balcony, watering my basil plant, I received a short email from Elise. Subject, "I get it now. Body parenting is harder than I thought. I think I understand a little better now." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. I stared at the screen, uncertain what to feel. Was it manipulation? Was it growth? Was it just exhaustion, masquerading as humility? I brought it up to Dr. Marion. "You don't have to decide what it is," she said. "You just have to decide what it means for you." I waited 3 days before I wrote back. "Thanks for reaching out. I hope you and the baby are well. I'd be open to hearing more if that feels right." It was short, measured, boundaried. I didn't hear back for 2 weeks. And when I did, it was another short note. Elise had gotten a job part-time receptionist at a dental office. She'd moved into a small apartment of her own. Our parents were still helping, but less. She cries a lot, Elise wrote, referring to the baby. I thought I'd be better at this. I surprised myself by replying. It's okay not to have it figured out. No one does. We didn't fall into old patterns. We didn't become best friends overnight. But the tone was different now. Less expectation, more curiosity. And for once, it didn't feel like the beginning of another trap. It felt like the tentative start of something else entirely. By early summer, my life in Portland no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like home. The quiet mornings with tea and fresh herbs. The soft hum of a bike ride through side streets where no one knew who I had once been. The classroom where I was simply Ms. Carter, a teacher who loved literature and took extra time with the students who struggled. My identity was no longer defined by what I gave up, but by what I built. Still, when I opened my inbox one morning and saw a new email from my mother's subject line, "Please read this, Nina." My breath caught in my throat. It had been months of silence. Part of me didn't want to open it, but I did. The email wasn't long, but it was carefully written. Not in her usual tone of martyrdom or moral superiority. No bolded phrases, no passive-aggressive guilt. Just this, "Your father had a minor heart attack last week. He's recovering well, but I thought you should know. I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't want you to hear it from someone else. That's all." There was no sign-off, no love mom, no expectation. I sat at the table staring at those words until the sunlight shifted across the floor. I called my therapist. "What does your body feel when you read it?" Dr. Marion asked. Strangely, calm, I said. "Then that's your answer." I didn't fly back to Philadelphia, but I sent a bouquet of flowers to the hospital. I called the front desk and asked to speak to my father. His voice was weaker than I remembered. "Thanks for calling," he said. "I didn't think you would." "I'm glad you're recovering," I replied. A pause. "Then you sound strong." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That short call became the first in a series of cautious scheduled check-ins, emails, brief updates. Nothing deep, nothing raw. But it wasn't manipulation. It was at last neutrality. Later that month, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, from Mom. 3 pages, front and back. No dramatic declarations. No rewriting of the past. Just a gentle unraveling of old expectations. I may have been wrong about some things she wrote. We pressured you. We didn't listen. We expected more than was fair. I'm not sure how to undo that, but I'm open to trying if you ever are. I cried when I finished reading. Not because she had begged for forgiveness, she hadn't, but because it was the first time she'd let go of control. I brought the letter to therapy. "What do I do with this?" I asked. "You ask yourself," Dr. Marion said, "not what they want from you, but what you want from them." And so I wrote back, "Thank you for the letter. I'm still healing and I need to take things slowly, but I'm open to a phone call on my terms. With clear time boundaries. I hope Dad continues to recover well." We scheduled a 30-minute call. It was awkward, stilted, but there was no manipulation, no script, just 2 people on opposite ends of a very long bridge trying to meet somewhere in the middle. That was enough. That fall, Elise and I scheduled our first video chat. She looked tired. Her apartment was small, cluttered with baby things, but it was hers. "I never said thank you," she said, "for not blowing up when they ambushed you, for walking away when I couldn't." I nodded. I had to. I was drowning. She looked down. I didn't understand then, but I do now. I'm raising a daughter by myself. It's a lot. The baby toddled into view, dark curls and bright eyes, the kind of spirit I used to have before I learned to be cautious. "Her name's still Nina," Elise said. I almost changed it, but I didn't. "She doesn't owe me anything," I said gently. "She'll know who she's named after someday," Elise replied. "Not because of what you gave us, but because you were brave enough to say no." That stayed with me. In the end, what I thought was the closing of a door was actually the sound of a new one unlocking from the inside. It still stuns me sometimes how quickly love turns to slander when control slips away. After the police wellness check and the cease and desist letter, my parents shifted tactics. They didn't fight me directly anymore. They took it public. Quietly, strategically, but unmistakably. Rachel, ever my lifeline, was the first to alert me. "They're posting weird stuff on Facebook," she said, during one of our weekly calls. Vague quotes about wayward daughters, prayer requests. Your mom tagged a photo of a candle with "Pray for healing." I groaned. She's casting me as the prodigal child. More like the deranged one Rachel said. She's implying you've had a breakdown. I laughed short, sharp, bitter. It wasn't even surprising. When manipulation doesn't work, people like my mother pivot to character assassination. They don't ask why you left. They tell everyone you're sick. I could have confronted her, demanded a retraction, but I knew better. Calling her out would only confirm the narrative she'd already seeded, that I was unstable, ungrateful, angry. So I did something radical. I ignored her. I deactivated all my old social media accounts and created new ones under a pseudonym. No photos, no bios, just blank profiles I could use to follow news and stay connected with my Portland circle. And in that digital silence, something beautiful happened. The noise faded. For the first time in years, my internal monologue wasn't a reactive litany of defense. It was stillness, peace, room to think, room to feel, and eventually, room to hope. I poured myself into work. My new school wasn't perfect, but it was functional. The administration respected boundaries. The students were sharp and hilarious. I started an after-school writing club for the kids who didn't quite fit in the quiet ones. The overachievers, the ones who reminded me of myself. At home, I redecorated my space to feel like me. I painted one wall deep ocean blue, hung up art I'd never have bought in Boston, learned to make mushroom risotto, took myself out to dinner when I wanted company, said no when I didn't. It wasn't about loneliness, it was about sovereignty, and in that stillness the shame started to dissolve. I stopped flinching at the sound of a phone notification. I stopped justifying my choices in conversations with new friends. I stopped mourning who my family should have been, and started accepting who they actually were. It was grief, but it was clean grief. One day while cleaning out my desk drawer, I found the old spiral notebook where I'd mapped my escape plan step by step, page by page. My own declaration of independence in ballpoint pen. I flipped through it slowly like a sacred text. On the last page, I'd written something that stunned me. You are not selfish, you are sacred, and sacred things are allowed to protect themselves. I wept when I read it, because I believed it now. Truly, it took me over 3 decades to realize that my life was not something to be negotiated. Not with parents, not with siblings, not even with a baby named after me. I was allowed to matter on my own terms. A month later, Elise emailed me again. The tone was softer, less declarative. Subject, how did you know? Body. How did you know it was okay to walk away? That you'd be okay? Some days I look at her and I'm terrified I'll mess it all up. But I also think maybe you walking away made this version of me possible. I didn't understand before. Now I think maybe I do. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I replied, I didn't know. I was terrified too, but I also knew what it felt like to disappear into other people's expectations. That scared me more. She didn't write back right away, and that was okay. Healing isn't linear. Forgiveness isn't instant, but something was changing. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was expanding, and the version of me they once tried to collapse into a caregiver's mold was now too wide, too rooted, too alive to be shrunk again. By the time autumn colored the trees in Portland, something inside me had settled, not in the sense of giving up, but of grounding, like a river finding its bed after years of flooding. I had for the first time in my adult life chosen myself, and despite everything I'd been told growing up, that love means sacrifice, that family always comes first, that wanting space is selfish, I was finally discovering that choosing yourself doesn't mean you hate your family. It just means you've learned to love yourself too. My colleagues at work began to notice. I was more vocal in meetings. I volunteered to lead our fall literature unit and proposed a community storytelling project for the students. One of the teachers pulled me aside after class and said, "You've really come alive these past few months. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I smiled and said thank you. What I didn't say was that peace is the best productivity hack I've ever found. And yet, just as the air grew colder and the holidays crept closer, a familiar ache returned. Not guilt, not longing, but something softer, nostalgia maybe. The ache of a wound scabbed over but not quite scarred. I hadn't spoken to Elise in over a month. I hadn't spoken to my parents since that short civil call after Dad's heart attack. I didn't know if I should want more contact, or if not wanting it made me a bad person. So I brought it to Dr. Marion, who had become more like a compass than a therapist. I keep thinking I told her maybe I should be the bigger person and visit for the holidays. She leaned back and asked, "What would visiting cost you?" I blinked. "You mean financially?" "No," she said. "Emotionally." "What would it cost your nervous system, your peace, your sense of safety?" The answer came so quickly I surprised myself too much. And then she said the thing that unlocked something deep in me. Being the bigger person doesn't mean making yourself smaller. I walked home that day feeling taller. Instead of flying to Philadelphia for Thanksgiving, I hosted a dinner in Portland. I invited neighbors, co-workers, friends from ceramics class, people who brought their own dishes and stories, who stayed long after dessert, laughing and reminiscing. As we cleared plates and poured spiced cider, I looked around my apartment, warm, cluttered, filled with people who respected me, and I realized this is family too. Chosen family. The kind that doesn't demand silence as proof of loyalty. The kind that doesn't confuse obedience with love. And yet, I hadn't fully closed the door on my birth family. I didn't need to. The door could stay ajar, just far enough to breathe, but not wide enough to walk back into the fire. A week before Christmas, I received a holiday card from my mother. Simple, no glitter, no long letter inside. Just a photo of Elise and the baby in front of a small tree and a handwritten line beneath. "We're learning slowly. Thank you for teaching us that love doesn't mean control." I sat with that for a long time, and then with steady hands I placed the card on my bookshelf, not as a sign of reconciliation, but as a reminder people can change, even if it's slow, even if it's messy, even if it's not the change we once begged for. Later that night, Elise texted me a video of the baby now wobbling on her feet, babbling mama, and holding a stuffed bear I recognized from my old childhood room. She calls it Nina Bear Elise wrote. I laughed. I didn't cry. Instead, I texted back, "She's beautiful. You're doing better than you think." That night, wrapped in a blanket on my balcony, sipping tea under the string lights I'd hung myself, I whispered something into the cold air. "I forgive you, not because they asked, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved the freedom that comes with letting go." The first time I saw them again was almost 2 years after I left. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There were no tears at the airport, no orchestral swell of redemption. Just a hotel lobby in Philadelphia, a coffee shop across the street, and a 30-minute limit I'd set weeks in advance. I had returned for work a national educators conference and had debated for weeks whether to let them know I'd be in town. Eventually, I sent a single-line message to Mom. "I'll be in Philadelphia next weekend for a conference. If you'd like to meet for coffee, I'm available Saturday from 11 to 11:30 at the cafe across from the Sheridan Hotel. Let me know." She replied within an hour, "We'll be there, thank you." Saturday came, and with it a soft drizzle, the kind that turns sidewalks into mirrors. I wore a grey sweater and simple jeans, no makeup, no armor except the clarity I had earned. When I entered the cafe, they were already seated by the window. My father looked older, his posture slightly stooped. My mother wore a red scarf I remembered from Christmases past. Both of them stood when I approached as if unsure what greeting was appropriate. I nodded politely, "Hi." We sat. For the first 5 minutes we talked about the weather, my conference, their new neighbor with the loud dog. It felt surreal, like slipping into a play I no longer wanted a role in. Then Mom said Elise told us she's applying to nursing school. That made me pause. "Really?" I asked, surprised. "That's great." "She said she wants to help people," Dad added. "But on her own terms." We all knew what that meant. There was a silence. Then Mom said softly, "We're proud of her, and we're trying to be proud of how she got there, even if it was messy." I nodded. No apologies came, but no justifications either. And that in its own way was something new. After 25 minutes, I glanced at my phone. I should head out soon. They stood immediately. My mum hesitated, then said, "Would it be okay to write you now and then? Just small updates, nothing personal." "Sure," I said. "Small is fine." She smiled. Not the victorious smile I knew from my childhood, not the manipulative smirk. Just a quiet, almost awkward smile, like someone trying a new language they hadn't quite mastered. That night, back in my hotel room, I stared at the city skyline, the old skyline, the one that once made me feel caged, then invisible, then desperate to run. But tonight, it was just a view. Nothing more, nothing less. Elise called the next morning. "I heard you saw them," she said. "How did it go?" "Fine," I said, brief. "They're different now," she offered. "Not perfect, not even close, but different." I believed that I said, and I did. Not because I needed them to be, but because I no longer needed anything from them. Elise was quiet for a beat, then added, "I'm proud of you. For leaving, for surviving, for teaching me how to say no too." Her words sank in like warm sun on cold skin. That spring, Elise and the baby, now a talkative 3-year-old, came to Portland for a visit. Just a weekend. Nothing heavy, no expectations. We went to the zoo, walked through the rose garden, made pancakes in my little kitchen. Her daughter, my namesake, asked me if I liked dinosaurs and told me she was going to be a nurse like her mom. Elise smiled, tired but radiant. "You gave me the map," she said, "even if it was a painful one." And that was the moment I knew the cycle had broken. Not through confrontation, not through apologies shouted into the void, but through boundaries held, lives rebuilt, truth spoken gently but firmly. My mother never said "I'm sorry," but she learned to listen. And sometimes that's louder than any apology. 1 year turned into 2. 2 turned into 3. And Portland, once just a lifeboat, became the place where my roots finally took hold. My apartment walls were no longer bare. They held photos of friends, from book club hand-drawn artwork from my students, and a postcard Elise had sent from a weekend trip to the coast. We saw sea lions. "Thought of you." I had framed it, not because it meant reconciliation, but because it meant recognition. Recognition that even if we couldn't undo the damage, we were no longer adding to it. That fall, I was promoted to curriculum coordinator. I stood in front of the staff on my first day in the role and gave a short speech about how stories shape classrooms and how the ones we allow ourselves to tell and hear can change lives. Afterward, my principal told me I had a calm authority that made people want to follow me. I smiled, because I had spent most of my life being obedient, not authoritative. And now my leadership came not from pleasing others, but from knowing myself. Later that month, I went hiking in the Columbia River Gorge with a small group of friends. At the summit, we sat in silence, looking out over the vast expanse of pine trees and sky. I found myself thinking about a different summit, the mental mountain I'd had to climb just to say no, to walk away, to break the rules of a family story that said love and sacrifice daughter and servant and boundaries and betrayal. I had broken all those rules, and in doing so, I had rewritten them. When we got back to the trailhead, I had a message from Elise, a short video. Her daughter, my niece, stood proudly in a purple raincoat, holding a small pumpkin in each arm. "We picked one for you, Aunt Nina," she shouted at the screen. "It's the biggest one." I laughed, startled by how freely it came out. Later that night, I wrote a reply. "You picked the perfect one. I'm proud of you for climbing all the way up that hill." I wasn't just writing to her. I was writing to myself. That winter, I visited Philadelphia for a few days. I stayed in a hotel. I met Elise and the baby at a museum. I had coffee with my parents again, brief, contained, respectful. There were no confrontations, no emotional landmines, just a quiet truce made possible by distance and clarity. And when I boarded the plane back to Portland, I didn't feel guilt. I felt light. Back home, Rachel and I hosted our annual solstice dinner candles. Soup, laughter, the comfort of chosen family, gathered around a table we'd both once believed we might never have. She raised her glass and said, "To boundaries." Miguel, my friend from work, added, "And to becoming the person your younger self needed." I raised my glass too. "To freedom," I said. Not the kind that comes wrapped in rebellion or escape, but the kind that grows slowly, deliberately in the soil of self-respect. The kind of freedom that says, I am not a role. I am not a placeholder. I am not a story you wrote for me. I am me, whole, flawed, sacred, and finally mine.